I'm trying to watch. See, we got people coming in still. A few more, still a few more people coming in. So we will wait another few seconds as people are still coming in. Yeah, well, people are really coming in, which is good to see. All right, that looks like where we'll start. Welcome everyone to the Wilmette Institute's first web talk for the month of July. We actually have quite an exciting series of web talks coming up over the next month. And today's launches that excitement with a presentation by Dr. Daniel Pasheda on Baha'u'llah's long healing prayer in the light of a metaphysics of unity. First, however, I should probably say a little something about the Wilmette Institute for anyone who doesn't know what it is. It's been around since January of 1995, now for 25 and a half years. First, we started with a face-to-face program in the summers in Wilmette, but soon we switched over to online classes. And since 1998, we have run 605 online classes with a total of 15,615 registrations as of today. The people in those classes have come from 127 countries, and they have used course material in all kinds of different ways: presentations, study circles, radio broadcasts, standing up and giving talks in public, all kinds of things. Now, of course, in addition to the classes that we're offering, we also do these web talks, and we're looking at doing more and more presentations with prominent speakers being interviewed by Baha'is so that we can do more social discourse as well. And we're moving forward towards getting accreditation. We hope to be able to get accredited so that we can offer courses for college credit. We hope in the next year or so. We now, meanwhile, have a second partnership opportunity that's opening up that's quite exciting. Quickly, I should mention our upcoming courses. Next Thursday, Buddhism for Deepening and Dialogue begins. Then a week after that, we have Education Through the Revelation, Baha'i Revelation. This is basically a course on the Baha'i approach to education. Bringing consultation to the workplace in later August, and then science, religion, and the Baha'i faith towards, I think, middle to the end of August. In terms of upcoming web talks, those are all courses, of course. Next Sunday, Hussein Ahdieh will be speaking about Varga, one of the Bab's most well-known disciples, his life and martyrdom. In August, we will have 3 web talks on the 16th, 23rd, and 30th, all Sundays. So that should be quite nice, and should be quite a lot for people to go take a look at if they're interested in them. To introduce Daniel now, he has his PhD from the University of California, Riverside in religious studies with a focus on Islamic studies and religion in the United States. His dissertation was American Islam, the Next Generation, Young Adult Muslim Americans on Campus, Faith, Identity, Citizenship, Gender, and Pluralism. And having taught Muslim students on campus, it's really quite a fascinating mix, I must say. You've got everyone from the secular to the fairly devout, and it's really quite exciting to interact with all these young American Muslims. Daniel has also taught comparative religion and humanities at Northern Arizona University in Flagstaff, and currently is teaching in the Spokane area at Eastern Washington University and Gonzaga University. He's working on a review of the book American Messiahs, revising a research paper on Baha'i pilgrimage to submit for publication, and is also completing a research project on the 99 beautiful names of God in Islam, which of course links directly to the long healing prayer, which is our topic today. So without further delay, I will now turn everything over to Daniel. Welcome, Daniel, to this web talk. Thank you very much for offering to present today, and I will stop sharing my screen so we can see your program.
Thank you very much, Rob, and the team at Wilmette Institute. It was a pretty quick turnaround between offering to do this web talk and making time for me to do so. And it's a research project that I started last summer and just submitted to the Association for Baha'i Studies, and I think it's under review. The journal article that's at their word max of 14,000 words. But I'm trying to share some of the highlights of the paper, and just this very exciting, amazing healing prayers, something very apropos for the times we're living in. I know many of the Baha'is that are logging in, it's a prayer and tablet that's near and dear to their hearts. I first fell in love with the tablet when I was about 16 years old and used it a lot, whether it's physical illness or just having sort of psychological, emotional difficulties, and became very intimate with the prayer. And I'm hoping that not a lot of opportunity for exchange through the webinar, but maybe once it's uploaded, people can share some of their own experiences with the tablet in the thread on the YouTube and perhaps Facebook. And so I want to start with two stories. And the first story is about a former Shiite Islamic scholar who once he became Baha'i strove to serve Baha'u'llah and the believers for the rest of his life. But while he was among the exiles in the prison of Aqi, he fell dangerously ill and was confined to his bed, and then finally breathed his last breath. A secretary ran to Baha'u'llah giving word of his death while his family was beginning to mourn him. Baha'u'llah said, "Go, chant the prayer of Ya Shafi, O thou the healer, and Mercy Jafar will come alive. Very rapidly, he'll be as well as ever." This was done at his bedside, and although he was cold and lifeless at first, slowly he began to stir, then moving his limbs, and by the end of the hour lifted his head, sat up, and began to tell jokes and laugh. He lived for a long time after that, and we read two somewhat different versions of the story and stories of Baha'u'llah, as well as in memorials of the faithful. And the second story is about Dr. Muhajir. And while he was a while he was a pioneer in Indonesia, in his biography, Iran, Furatam Muhajir writes that he would often chant the long healing prayer for his patients, many of whom had an Islamic background, were used to drawing upon the names of God as a form of healing and protection and guidance in their lives. And they would say they would feel a lot better after that. And it was probably combined with Dr. Muhajir, who, of course, a hand of the cause of God, his very gentle and loving bedside manner. While I was doing this research project, I became acquainted with a Baha'i physician in the Portland area who expressed that he begins his day every day saying the long healing prayer, getting his own heart and mind in the right place to be an effective healer in all respects of the term healing and wholeness and balance, which is the main theme of my research as well. So names of this prayer, the English-speaking friends know it simply as the long healing prayer, and because it is fairly long, when we do the long part, we know what's being spoken of. In the European languages, there's usually a direct translation of that, Oración larga de curación, or German, das lange Heilungsgebet. And the Arabic-speaking and Persian-speaking friends usually know it by its Arabic names, Lahi Shafa Tawil, the long healing tablet, Lahi Shafa, tablet of healing, or Lahi Anta al-Káfí, literally tablet of thou, the sufficing, and variously named in this respect. So you can call it a prayer, you can call it a tablet. The word Káfí, which means sufficing, is a keynote repeating the beginning of the repeating refrain, thou the sufficing, thou the healing, thou the abiding, thou abiding one. And I know when my mother-in-law, who's a big coffee drinker, learned that, she got a big kick out of that. That was a real hoot. That sufficing is coffee in Arabic, and I'm sure my stepdad, who's a big coffee drinker as well, gets a kick out of that. And represent the Northwest, as we're known for coffee, although I don't drink much myself. So versions of the prayer. When I was looking into this, I was quite surprised that the version of the healing prayer that's found on my Baha'i prayer book app, right? I can go from English to Arabic quite quickly. That it seemed to have been different than the prayer I was so familiar with in English. And And the differences start from the very beginning, where the one that's found in the Baha'i Prayer Book app, and that's most commonly published in Baha'i prayer books. When I asked my various Persian Baha'i friends how your prayer starts, it was the second version of the prayer, which starts with Bismillahi al Dasi, name of God, the invincible, the most holy. And when I did more close research, I found there are various other differences in the prayer, although the two versions are about 96% the same. So not a huge difference, just slightly disconcerting when one is very familiar with one version of the prayer and the other version of the prayer is distinct. I wrote the research department of the House of Justice last year to see if there's any clarifications about this, and they replied in September that the most authentic version that's been identified is in the handwriting of Zainul Muqarrabin, who was a doctor of Islamic law and a very erudite individual with excellent penmanship and very careful in his details as well. And they say that this is the version that was the basis of the current authorized translation to English. Right, and so this version is the one that I list here that as Huwa Shafi, he is the healer, the sufficer, the helper. And in the Arabic, this one it's more difficult to find. The prayer book Nafahat al-Fadl, fragrances of divine favors, my own translation of what that might be into English. And this link, you can also find that version, but Persian Institute for Baha'i Studies and published in this prayer book, it's more difficult to find. It's much more easier to find, not the inauthentic, but perhaps when say the less authentic version. It was this somewhat less authentic version, which was the basis of the first translation to English that was done by Marcia Gale and her father, Ali Kuli Khan, in 1945. It wasn't published in any books. There's just kind of photocopied and sometimes hand copied and passed around by Baha'is, but did inspire some aspects of the translation that was made into English and became official from 1980 that we find in English prayer books and became the basis of translations into other European languages. So not much is known about the occasion of revelation, when exactly it was revealed. It's said during the Aqqa period, whether it's usually determined perhaps the first 5 or 10 years of the Aqqa period, especially with that story of Mirza Jafar that I shared at the beginning. It seemed to be somewhat during the earlier part of that period that it was being circulated by then. People knew what that was. So as far as why there's two somewhat different prayers, was it actually revealed twice? Was there scribbler? Was there someone who had it memorized and then just used their best very good memory to try to do it accurately? We don't know. I created a table for my research paper that summarizes the differences, and you can see that verse 17, for example, in the Hua version, which is the most official, the words maneh and saneh translated as withholding one and creating one. There are different words in that verse, shafeh and dafeh, which Ali Kuli Khan Marcia Gale renders interceding one, encouraging one. Actually, that might be my own translation right there. Other big differences, verse 37 in the Bismi version is not found in the more official version of the prayer. The final paragraphs are pretty close. There's just different prepositions in one or two places, and this kind of a switch word order in one places when things are being listed there at the end. But as I mentioned, the prayer, the two versions are about 96% similar, so not that big of a deal. So another interesting thing in my research was trying to unravel this statement that's found in many Baha'i prayer books, that there are certain prayers that are invested with special potency, and they're recited by the believers with unquestioning faith and confidence. Through them, they may enter in a much closer communion with God and identify themselves more fully with His laws and precepts. And the three obligatory prayers are mentioned: long, medium, and short. The Tablet of Ahmad, which many Baha'is are very familiar with and have memorized. And this healing prayer is also mentioned, but it doesn't We know that Baha'u'llah wrote many prayers that have healing as a theme, and it doesn't distinguish one from another. One of the most famous of the healing prayers, of course, is the prayer, "Thy name is my healing," Ya Allahi ismuka shafa'i in its Arabic. And this was actually revealed as part of the Lahi Tib, and there's an article on it in the Association for Baha'i Studies, which is a very interesting study into the tablet of medicine. And this prayer was also, of course, rendered into English in Prayers and Meditation by Shoghi Effendi, versus the long healing prayer was not translated into English under the supervision of the guardian of the Baha'i faith in his lifetime, but as I mentioned, in 1980. Now, Mr. Robert Yoder wrote the Universal Justice in more than a dozen years ago, and they replied that it is probably the one known as the long healing prayer, but nothing specific about this has been located at this time. Now, this reply to Mr. Yoder, they also mentioned that within the long healing prayer, it gives assurance of its potency to heal and protect within the text itself. So most Baha'is can say is that what is the prayer referred to in the statement written on behalf of Shoghi Effendi, that the healing prayer has special potency? It's probably the long healing prayer. But of course, the short and sweet one has its beauty and awesomeness as well. And many Baha'is, it's very near and dear to our hearts as well. While I was researching this, I had the notion, because the names of God are so important to Islamic practices, if there's other sort of Islamic precedents in which Baha'u'llah engages in this beautiful prayer. And of course, calling upon God by his attributes and perfections is something that's not unique to Islamic tradition. We find it in Judaism and Christianity, even Hinduism, and in many cases Sikhism. It's a very, very big deal as well. But calling upon God by his different perfections, given scriptural sort of official encouragement in this statement in Quran 17:110 that says, "Say, call upon Allah or God, or call upon Rahman, the merciful. By whatever name you call upon him, it is well. For to him belong the most beautiful names." And we get that Baha'u'llah is directly engaged with this tradition of the Asma'ul Husna, the most beautiful names, the most lovely names, different translations of that term, because the very phrase in Arabic is used by Baha'u'llah in his final paragraphs of the long healing prayer, Asma'ul Husna. Now, the names of God, calling upon the names, is given even more focus in the Hadith tradition of Islam, in which we find statements such as this: there are 99 names of Allah. He who commits them to memory will get into paradise. And it's found in various Sunni Hadith as well as in at least one Shiite Hadith. And what is the notion of 99 names of God? There's one of the Hadiths that says God is an odd number. God is one is an odd number, and God loves the odd number, something to that effect. And because, of course, in the Quran itself, there are more than 99 names of God that are mentioned, or perfections of God. And in the long healing prayer, it's the same thing. There's more than 99 that are mentioned or named in that prayer. In an interesting book on the names of God, that the Islamic scholar Abu al-Hamid al-Ghazali, who's probably, for Sunnis at least, second to Muhammad is in being the most influential Muslim in the history of the religion. And al-Ghazali says that the wisdom of saying that there's 99 names of God is like saying that there is a king, even though that king has 1,000 soldiers, with just these 99 soldiers, they could defeat or conquer any other army, right? In other words, God has countless names and perfections, but the 99 are sufficient to have a rich sort of access to the personality and manifold reality of God. And we can say the same sort of thing with the long healing prayer, right? There's a limited number of names, but it gives a very rich spectrum of the divine personality for those who recite it and meditate upon it. Now, there are actually lists of the names of God in the Hadith of Islam, include although al-Ghazali had some suspicions of whether this could be actually traced back to the Prophet Muhammad himself, these actual listings of these are the 99 names that Muhammad was speaking of, and those there are various listings which differ somewhat between the lists. But when we compare a couple of the most prominent lists with the actual names of God that Baha'u'llah uses in the long healing prayer, we find there's only about, even when we go down to the root words, etymological root words, and compare those, there's only 30 names of God that overlap. In other words, Baha'u'llah seems to be engaged with the traditions of the 99 names of God and accessing God through these names, but he has no interest in either affirming any list nor dismissing any list per se. And this is a very original creative work by Baha'u'llah. You see a table there of comparing and breaking down the long healing prayers list with those of the hadiths. So, in addition, some Islamic precedents to the prayer, we find that there are traditions that there's one hidden name of God or one greatest name of God among the different names, and Muslims themselves have speculated what is the greatest name of God, including Allah itself. Just the plain generic, the God, has been prominently commended as the greatest name of God. Sometimes ahad or wahid, one or singular, because that's Islam is so monotheistically focused, right? Became known as the greatest name of God. Especially in the Shiite tradition, there's sort of hints that it might be the name Baha or a version of the name Baha. And this is important because there are, in both Jewish and Islamic stories, there's traditions in which the prophets were able to perform the miracles that they did because of their knowledge of the hidden names of God. So there's a story of that Joseph, he was able to interpret dreams and prophesize the future because he had the hidden names of God written on his cloak, or the Technicolor Dreamcoat, as we know for those who are musical buffs. Moses had the names of God on his staff, therefore he was able to part the Red Sea. Scholars say often consider a different sea called the Reed Sea, but whatever it was, a big sea that he parts, and the other miracles that he did because he knew the names of God. So knowing the hidden and greatest name of God gives great potency to be able to heal, according to this notion. And Baha'u'llah draws upon 3 names of God that are really commended also in the writings of the Bab, including a name that overlaps with the Bab's name, Ali Muhammad, the Bab Ali. In the very first verse of the healing prayer, it says, "O exalted one," and that word is Ali. And the third name is Bahi, a version of Baha, which for Baha'is is the official greatest name of God. And the Bab also prominently referred to the name Káfí, which is that all-sufficing or sufficing. Once again, is one of those hidden greatest names of God. And of course, that's part of the repeating refrain of the prayer. There are talisman or sort of lucky charms that have been created by Muslims, often worn as jewelry sometimes. I'll refer to it in a later slide of some other forms of talismans, but this was an interesting talisman in which a prayer was written by a Muslim for a Christian woman for healing and protection. And the language of it is very similar to the long healing prayer. Now, it would have been helpful if the author from which I found this had mentioned about the year this was composed, and he didn't. It may have been hundreds and hundreds of years ago this was composed. It may have been contemporary to Baha'u'llah. It may have been after Baha'u'llah. But I asked you by your name, which you have preferred to all names, right? This sort of greatest name idea, to heal, cure, and cleanse the bearer, right, of this book. Guard this human body from all malice, from every evil, and from the mischief and injury of all things created by God. Right, that this name, this hidden name, is a cure-all kind of thing. Other ways that Baha'u'llah engages with Islamic traditions, the idea of dhikrs, often pronounced as zikr by different Arabic dialects, which is a rich word, can be translated as recollecting or remembering God, bringing God to mind, mentioning God, praising God. And the way that Muslims draw upon the names of God to praise God and think about God is different depending on on the Muslim, how they're raised, perhaps a Sufi or a mystical school that they're connected with. A popular approach is having sets of 3 different names that are each mentioned 33 times, such as Subhanallah, 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 moved to Alhamdulillah. Now Baha'is, the closest thing to dhikr as a sort of ritualistic sort of practice that we have is probably the repetition of Allahu Apa, the greatest name, 95 times. God is all glorious. But the other place that arguably is the long healing prayer, where there's recitation, invocation, meditation on the names of God within within this prayer, that draws upon this dhikr, which is very central practice for many Muslims, getting to know God through meditating and invoking His names. Now, this is the last slide on Islamic precedents, but a very interesting one. There's much commentary that's been developed over the centuries about particular names of God being effective to cure a particular ill, or protect, or accomplish some other purpose, such as if calling upon the name al-Ahad, the One, actually brings you in the company of the angels. Was a thought both within the Shiite traditions, what this is drawn from, but Sunnis had similar sort of thoughts. Al-Ali, the highest, helps one, improves one's status, right? The high, exalted. Al-Basir, to improve eye ailments. Now, one of the talismanic practices, they've been just calling upon the name. There are other things like the name is actually written in Arabic with saffron, and then one consumes it. Perhaps if it was Al-Basir, that could have even been sprinkled upon one's eyes that need healing. If you need to heal broken relationships, the name Wadud, which means loving or affectionate, may have been called upon, right? So the idea of particular names being effective to cure particular ills was important. Now, a Sufi thinker about 800 years ago, Attallah, he said that it's only effective when there's a logical correspondence between the name and what's being cured. And by this, say that perhaps it's just as effective, the change in consciousness of the person that's praying as sort of a certain name having kind of a magical effect. And that really draws closer towards some of my arguments about the long healing prayer. There are other prayers that really, in the Islamic tradition, that really focus upon names of God, the most important being the Ramadan prayer of Baha, which is familiar to many Baha'is because it inspired much of the Bahá'í or Bahá'í calendar that the Bab used, which attributes perfections of God were used for the names of the months. And there's a beautiful translation of this prayer by Stephen Lambden. I won't read it, but you can see that there's different morphologies of 3-letter roots, beginning with what for Baha'is is the greatest name, Baha, and then it turns to a different attribute of God and has the same sort of thing. And there are other Shiite healing prayers that have a real focus upon names of God. Those are healing, such as this one, which calls upon God as ancient, ever-living, self-subsisting, qa'imun, ever-existent as aliyun, by thy mercy be rahmatika, which is, right, so there's lots of, a Baha'i who had a Muslim background, why and how this healing prayer would be effective for healing, they had a lot of material that they're working from in their tradition, that this would be a very natural of a way and reason why this would be effective for healing. One of the fascinating things to find as I was doing this research was a very elegant numerical structure of this prayer. And this kind of boosted confidence. When I was learning the prayer years ago, sometimes I would wonder, and at first glance I would wonder what's the relation between these different names, and why were they combined, and to find that there's a very numerical structure as well as a very poetic structure, which we'll go into in the next slide, has boosted my confidence and then just love for this prayer as being very deliberate, very careful. Of course, God is I assume is perfect in everything God does. But just from a literary, a non-Baha'i perspective, it's the structure and the literary excellence of the prayer is just amazing. So overall, there are names of God invoked 296 times. So not I say different names of God. Some names of God are repeated, but including the refrain. But overall, collectively, 296 names of God. So very rich focus upon the names of God. Overall, of those 296, there are 126 distinct names of God mentioned, and 126, lo and behold, is a product of 9 times 14. Now, of the within the invocations themselves of I call on thee, or O exalted one, O faithful one, O glorious one, and if we take out the repeating refrain and then just count then the next one, O sovereign, upraised, or O judge, right? As you move through the prayer, if you count all those three words, they're unique to each invocation. Count them all up. There's 39 verses. 39 times 3 plus 2 is 100. So the 40th verse only has 2 names of God called upon. It's actually 119 times. And numbers of 9 and 19 and 18 are very significant for by faith, as 9 is a number of unity, completeness, harmony, and 19 in a similar sort of way, which also refers to God's one or oneness, 1-9. All things refer back to God. Now, when we take the 126 distinct names of God and summarize them by the different 3-letter roots from which pretty much every Arabic word can be drawn from, then there are 91 root words of the names of God. And 91, of course, is 19 flipped, which is fun and interesting with these numerical significances. Now, when we count the words in each of the invocations themselves, that there are actually 19 words in 38 of the 40 verses. Yeah, and when we count how many syllables there are, grammatically there are actually 38 syllables, or 19 doubled in every, in not every, but most, the grand majority of the verses. Now we should make note that grammatically there are 38 syllables, but when, according to styles of recitation, a few of those syllables are actually dropped at the end of words. And so that makes it 35. And it's actually chanted version of the prayer. So really some amazing things as far as the numerical structure of the prayer. Now, the poetic structure, and I want to make sure I have time to get to the kind of meat and potatoes of the argument, is that I started learning Arabic when I was around, I guess, about 20 years old. And it wasn't until a year and a half ago or so that I started looking at it in Arabic. And it was really cool just to find that the different verses, the different names in each verse rhyme with each other. I'm starting with the very first one, which Bika ya Ali, Bika ya Wafi, Bika ya Bahi, right? Ali, Wafi, Bahi rhyme with each other. And in this verse, as well as in one other verse, those 3 names also rhyme with the repeating refrain of Thou the sufficing, Thou the healing. So Ali, Wafi, Bahi, Káfí, Shafi, Baki, right? These all rhyme with each other. As I'm not a professional chanter, I'm going to try to share Miss Badia, who is a famous name for many Persian speakers for her beauty of chanting. So let me see if I can share the sound. I'm going to stop the share and share sound instead. Right here. Hope this works. So this is on the internet. If you put Long Healing Prayer and her name, you can find this yourself, and it's a lovely rendition. Hopefully this works.
Nothing yet, Daniel. I got it ready if you don't.
I'm going to have Boyd share it from the 17th second because we're having a technical difficulty. Thanks, Boyd.
بك يا علي بك يا وفي بك يا بهي أنت الكافي وأنت الشافي وأنت الباقي يا باقي بك يا سلطان بك يا رفعان بك يا ديان أنت الكافي وأنت الشافي وأنت الباقي يا باقي.
Thank you, Boyd. And so once Boyd shares, allows me to share my screen again, we can hear that's in the repeating refrain, just thou the sufficing, thou the healings, very hypnotic, and the translation to English is so beautifully done that it keeps a lot of that same sort of rhythmical cadence as one says the prayer, and just to really focus the heart, focus the mind towards trying to have some sort of mystical connection with one's Lord, and as well as a greater understanding according to our human limitations. So, but if you stop sharing computer sound, I think I'll be able to share the screen once again. Perfect. Thank you, Boyd, for your assistance.
My pleasure.
And so one of my arguments is that the prayer is both just for invocation, right? Just calling upon God, but it also invites one to meditate upon the relationships of these different attributes, and with the very deliberately made, right? They rhyme, and then these different versions of the same attributes, often with a different morphology or form, to have a slightly different meaning, appear sometimes again to the tablet. And there's this very interesting symmetry going on that one comes to believe that these attributes were put together very deliberately by the author. And so one starts to examine what's the relationship between these attributes, both on the divine level as well as with a Baha'i sensibility that upon the reality of the human being has been focused all the names and attributes of God, and it's the very purpose of life to actualize and develop these attributes as minds of these in which we're mind-rich in gems of inestimable value, and these gems are really the virtues or divine perfections that we can transcend the human level, right? And the very first name, that God being exalted, but God being glorious, has this faithful in between, right? And so this sort of being that's oblivious and above and transcends all things is not this sort of cold attachment, but one that's a very faithful friend with all the relationships one has on divine level, on a human level, in the same kind of respect. And the same sort of thing with the next verse, which O sovereign, O upraiser, O judge, Sultan, Rafan, Dayan, right? That the power one have, or the powers one has, just as God on his divine level uses it to upraise the human creation to a higher, more spiritually evolved level. That's our hope, and what we're working for as Baha'is. This is something that we can use what powers we have to raise those we're in relationship with, and use our powers of discernment to judge and discern how we can help each other along our spiritual path. Now, the verse 7, I want to look at for a moment, because mashuk, mahbub, majdub are arguably different variations of the word that might just be translated as beloved, but instead of repeating beloved, right, it has to be, kind of get these variations in meaning in English. So beloved one, cherished one, enraptured one, and gives you different notions of God as lover, God as beloved, in which mashuk is sort of this enraptured, fervent love, is very devoted love, and sort of overlap meaning with that final majdub, this very joyful kind of love. And the middle one, cherished one, mahbub, which is closely related to habib or habibi, right? Which might be a dear one, a cherished one, right? This is holding in great value, being very, very dear to, and all these attributes united by the sort of the ma that begins the syllables, and they're different variations on the same kind of theme. Now, this close symmetry in the rhyming, as well as in the phonemes, actual sounds of the attributes themselves, we find this going on in verse 12. O concealed one, O triumphant one, O bestowing one, which in the Arabic is bika ya qa'ib, ya ghalib, ya wahib, right? Of course, the rhyming going on consistently, but the ideas of ghaib, for Baha'is and for those of a Muslim background, that which is unseen, the unseen realm, the ghaib, is a special realm within the Islamic tradition, which includes God, which includes the angels, which includes the heaven, and for Baha'is more generally, the concourse on high is included in those unseen realities, which reinforce and call upon, reinforce our efforts in teaching the faith and trying to perform good deeds, and in healing and protecting others, and being a guiding influence for each other. And so, right, this is closely connected to the triumphant one, Gala, which can also be translated as subduer or conqueror, in which we're reinforced, we're bestowed upon, right? Wahid, bestowing one to work for the benefit of the world, for each other, for the health and protection of all. And it's a very kind, sort of gentle, sort of conquering the hearts of human beings with the beauty of the teachings. The one of the others I want to speak about is this one from verse 14, fashioner, satisfier, uprooter, right? Which is fascinating. This words saneh, kane, kale. The words really are closely connected, where kane and kale are only differ by the middle phoneme N versus L, while saneh and kane only differ from the S versus Q in the beginning. But read this idea that everything is fashioned by the Creator in a very deliberate, careful manner, might inspire Baha'is to look at all created things with a similar sort of reverence that's expression of one's Creator. And this is one of the keynotes of my arguments for the paper, that relating each and every aspect of creation, whether it's the spiritual realm of the unseen or the physical creation or each other, right? Seeing it as that which is fashioned by Creator that creates everything in its perfect sort of manner, and infused with attributes, his own attributes and means and perfections, and gives everything that needs spiritual, psychological, physical needs to be satisfied. Now, this is when I remember wondering about what's this uprooter business. It seems to be kind of harsh, right? Like, to be uprooted from something. But with some more thought, I was thinking about, right, that sometimes a flower, you'll plant a flower or plant somewhere and it won't do so well, but you plant it someplace else and it's able to flourish. And same thing with human beings. Sometimes we need to be uprooted from a certain situation, placed in a new one. to be able to continue on our spiritual growth. Or sometimes we just have desires and so-called unmortified desires that need to be uprooted, that we really need the fancy car or the 1,000 likes on certain social media posts. No, these are superfluous sort of desires typically. And we can be more satisfied if we put away this covetousness and seek contentment, be satisfied with the basic necessities. So lots of beautiful meditation that can be done with this prayer. I want to move soon to my final slide, but maybe one more note related to this prayer that invites meditation upon the relationship between these attributes and perfections itself. One of the close symmetries that we find and close coherence between the different attributes and names is sometimes Baha'u'llah will have two of the names in the same verse come from the same three-letter etymological root, such as we find in this verse 24, in which it begins with malath, which is the unique one, but then the second word, ma'ath, and the third one, musta'ath, is or have the same etymological root. And those who recite the Quran, Muslims will ritually begin it, A'udhu billahi minash shaitani rajim, right? I take refuge in God from the accursed Satan. This A'udhu is that same root, which is I take refuge, it's translated on. So shelter to all preserving one. We're reminded of the fine finale of the prayer in which Baha'u'llah writes to protect the bearer of this blessed tablet, and whoso reciteth it, and whoso cometh upon it, and whoso passeth around the house wherein it is. Heal thou then by it every sick, disease, and poor one from every tribulation, distress, from every loathsome affliction and sorrow. And this idea of every house that passes around it, right? Is the question is, does it just have the prayer have a magical influence that anyone who happens to pass around the house will be cured and protected and healed by the incredible spiritual influences of this prayer? And we can probably answer yes. The Baha'is believe in these spiritual forces of the unseen, that even though those who are unaware, the heart of every righteous person throbs with the diffusion of the angels when the verses are recited. But we can also think of on the other practical level, that of what Baha'is are making efforts to do, including in the current goals of the National Spiritual Assembly, to make every home as a kind of Mashrukul Azkar itself, a house of worship in which prayer and service are combined, and these concentric circles of reaching out to others to be partners and collaborators in creating communities united in friendship and prayer and mutual service to each other, right? This is also this way in which every home can have this sort of shelter to all preserving, a haven for all kind of influence. So this is I had to throw this in there, even though I've already I'm moving towards the end of our time here. But in verse 27, these words translated, "O thou my soul, thou my beloved, O thou my faith." One of the interesting things about this is that middle word Janan. As far as in my conversations with others who are better at Persian and Arabic than I am, it's actually a borrowing, and it's the only place that I've identified in which Baha'u'llah borrows from the Persian language for this otherwise Arabic tablet, and a word for beloved from the Persian language, as we've seen that Baha'u'llah speaks of God as a beloved at various times in this tablet, and closely related to, right, John, which is translated as "thou my soul," which is also can be translated as a dear one as well. And many Baha'is, whether Persian speakers or not, will call each other, like I'll call my wife Tiara June, or Tiara John is another way to pronounce it. Tiara, my dear one. And this relationship between God as one's beloved and God, the very heart of hearts, and God as one's very faith and one's inmost heart is, invites very beautiful meditation upon the relationships between these. Wahaj, Balaj, Bahaj, enkindler, brightener, bringer of delight. We want to be a joyful enkindler and bringer of delight in our lives. And just beautiful symmetry between Wahaj, Balaj, Bahaj, very coherent. And I love this. So I'm going to make this my concluding slide. Make sure I'm respecting time, each other, the Wilmette Institute, and your time in this presentation. This quote that I've already quoted in the previous slide, I want to argue that the type of, just as the prayer itself has amazing coherence between the different attributes that are chosen within a single verse, this repeating refrain, thou the sufficing, thou the healing, thou the abiding, which unites the various verses with each other. This persistent theme of calling upon the names of God. Just as the tablet itself is very unified in its different parts with each other, it invites a picture of the world in which all things, you relate all things to the one who's the fashioner, who fashioned each thing with beauty and goodness, and trying to discern the attributes and names of God within the different created things. The prayer really, I think, a type of health and is related to wholeness, right? Being in balance, being whole, being complete, both within ourselves, but within our relationships with spiritual forces at work, in relationship with each other, where I can't be the best I want to be unless you're empowered to be the best you can be as well. This very mutual relationship. And my mother, who's listening to this webinar as well, who's a social worker, this is a concept and truth of her life that's very near and dear to her heart, and she lives by as well. A sort of healing, which is not just about individual health, but a mutual flourishing of everyone that's in a relationship with each other, in relationship with the planet, in relationship with the spiritual forces at work in the world. I believe that this tablet really invites that kind of meditation in which we're all have that, oh thou my soul, oh thou my beloved, oh thou my faith, at the heart of everything. So when we see in that light, we see the deep connections, this wholeness, rather than this very separate atomization or isolation or separation kind of worldview that sometimes we're pushed too far towards in a sort of Western approach to things. Obviously, things are different. Things have their distinctions, and recognize those distinctions is very important. According to the Quran, the very first thing God taught Adam was the ability to name things, be able to see their distinguishing attributes or characteristics, right? And with that, those attributes and virtues which he himself had been endowed as a human being, but also the deep interconnection, interweaving of physical, psychological, spiritual forces, social relationships, relationships with the earth itself. This is that metaphysics of unity, a fancy way for saying that this prayer invites a healing that comes from becoming more, our consciousness becoming more and more transformed to see the wholeness of ourselves with others, with the earth, with God, with spiritual forces, more generally, itself, and a life lived, and in which we're learning more and more about that, and hence constituting more health and wholeness in these deep relationships with each other, with the earth, with God itself. I believe that's at least my approach to continually revisiting this prayer and falling in love with it more and more. And I appreciate this opportunity to share some of this with you today, and the Wilmette Institute setting this up for me to share with you all. And this is my my slide, in which those of you who do not read Arabic, I've done my best to transliterate the entirety of the prayer into English, And so you can read and get a sense of some of its poetic form and how it sounds in the Arabic in more detail. And you can find this on Baha'i Library. If you just look up Long Healing Prayer, Pesheita, my last name, on Baha'i Library, it should come up no problem, or follow this URL. So back to you, Rob.
Thanks, Daniel. This is absolutely fascinating. Really, people were very inspired and very excited by it. I'm even tempted to note that your middle name means tremendous based on your list of greatest names of God, and I think that fits this presentation as well. Really, really very good and very not only enlightening but engaging. People, I think, really very much enjoyed it. People are saying, "I loved your talk; it was very inspiring." These kinds of things. Now the question is, do we have some questions about it? And we did have some questions that came in, I remember, overnight. I don't have access to those right offhand. Where were those? I got them, I guess, in an email. So if we can find that, I'll take a look. Not sure how quickly I can find it.
I will share that you have a very international audience today. You have Wisconsin, you have Dubai, you have the west coast of the United States, you have the Olympic Peninsula, you have Santa Monica, Malden, US, Nigeria, just to name a few.
Wow. Hello to everyone in all places. I'm so glad we're able to connect today together.
That's the sort of thing that often will happen with our web talks also. We'll tend to get a really wide range of responses. I'm trying to find the email that Nikki sent. The problem I have is I have two different email accounts, so I always have to guess which one to look in order to find them.
I remember reading one of the questions that came in this morning about I think it was written by someone named Jonathan, who graduated from NAU quite a bit before I was teaching at NAU, or before I was even born. But hello to Jonathan, if he's on with us today. And he was asking about what's the meaning of Bahá'í, or abiding one. And of course, every verse finishes with the refrain, the sufficing, thou the healing, thou the abiding. And then, oh, thou abiding one. This is repeated a second. It's given further emphasis. He was asking about the numerical significance of it. And I gave it some thought and couldn't come up with anything too significant about it in that, right? I don't know if you can see this Word document.
Yeah.
Word doc. Okay, so, right. So if I found the right thing, coffee, and it's where you translate a Arabic word to a number significance by taking every letter represents a number, and then you add them together, right? Then coffee becomes the number 111, Shafi 391, and Bahá'í 113. And so what's the correlation between these numbers? Nothing came to mind per se. Of course, Bahá'í itself has a lot of ones in there and ends with a 3. And there's 3 attributes that are focused upon in each verse. Maybe that's significant on a poetic level, though, as well. These names, coffee starts with the K, or the Kaf, which is further in the Arabic alphabet, and then you get a little bit closer to the beginning of the alphabet with the shim or sh sound, and then you get closest to a with Bahá'í, and this maybe I'm not going to speculate about author's intention, but for me, there's this idea in the Baha'i faith to referring everything back to God, and a name of the Bab was the primal point, right? Relating everything to that point from which everything comes from. As if you start out further away, at least in the alphabet, and you move closer and closer to that A, the beginning of the alphabet, the primal point with those 3 names. Maybe there's something to that in those now. The other question from Jonathan was related to the the Navajo religious culture, and he asked if there's any connection to the long healing prayer and the approach to healing by the Navajo, the people traditionally. And I'm not an expert on Navajo religious culture's healing. I tried to learn some aspects of it and try to teach it to my students when I was at NAU. But one of I believe it shares a notion in which, right, the principal word of the Navajo worldview is hojo, which is richly translated as harmony, balance, and beauty. And the sense of healing and health and longevity of life for Navajo is that we are living in balance, walking in harmony with each other, with nature itself, with the spiritual beings that are at work within nature itself, and being mindful of all those kinds of relationships is the way we walk in beauty and walk in harmony with everything. And this is really, in my reading of it, really the keynote of the long healing prayer as well. And so I think you can find those analogous approaches to healing between Navajo traditional religious culture and the long healing prayer.
There's also a question here from Saman Agdasi. Could you speak a bit about the verse, O thou who slayest the lovers, O God of grace to the wicked?
Let's see. Yes. Oops. There we go. That's at the very end. If my memory is serving me correctly. So this is the whole transliterated. I did it in two different formats. So let's see. Oh yeah, so it is the very last verse. Thou who slayest the lovers, O God of grace, the wicked. Ya qatila ushak, ya wahiba fusak. It's just giving my own little notion on it. We find with the thou who slayest the lovers, an interesting kind of plan. Within the Islamic tradition, there's two forms of the mystical experience of God that's been broken down to. One is called fana, which is one is so immersed in the experience of God that one finds that there is nothing that really exists but God. God is the only true reality that truly exists. The other term is called baqa, which is also has the same root as that word, that repeating word, baki, ya baki. And in this one still has a sense of self as existing, but the sense of self is transformed with, rather than seeing oneself primarily in terms of maybe a racial or gender identity or one's hobbies, one sees oneself in terms of a lover of one's beloved, the God, or a servant of one's Lord, as a knight of one's king, this sort of spiritual dynamic with God. So the analogy when I teach this to my students is as a metal rod that you stick in the fire for a while, and is burned away all the dirt and pollution that doesn't befit such a rod, and you bring it out and it's glowing. It keeps its basic structure and form, but it takes on those attributes of the fire, right? This is that sort of transform, right? So my own way I relate to this verse is that deep relationship with God, in which those former sort of lesser facets of self are burned away, all right, and one is reborn as a true lover of God, even though we don't deserve, right? Or God of grace, the wicked. This dynamic, the spiritual dynamic, is still at work. work for us, and when we can have confidence and faith in it. I'd love to hear the thoughts of the questioner upon this very rich verse, maybe in when the video is posted, and a lot of contributions on this near and dear prayer by the various people.
Maybe more time for discussion that way at the YouTube page. Alexander Lazarevich asks, is there any Hurufi influence seen on this prayer?
Maybe if he's on, he could explain what he's thinking of with the hurufiyya, as far as harf itself, or the word for letters and the analysis of letters and their symbolism. I've gone into a little bit. I'm not sure if that's what the questioner is thinking of, where there's just might be one phoneme that changes in between words. The analysis of the abjad, or the numerical significance of individual attributes. I didn't find any patterns of the 3 attributes or perfections of God within an individual verse. I did quite a bit of analysis and didn't find any patterns that way. But the entire tablet draws upon a notion that's given great emphasis in the writings of the Bab, in which we're, just as we see the different letters that come together produce a word of meaning, all of creation is kind of a letter which has a relationship with the whole word, which is God, and discerning these relationships between different things in the big cosmological perspective. God is something that the Bab encourages, and is, I think, the central impetus of this prayer in my own personal reading of it.
Good. I don't see any other questions. Let me see if there's anything else that's come in down here at the bottom. People are asking for sending the information by email as well, but we will have the web talk up, of course, on our YouTube channel, and we'll have the link there. And there's usually a place to discuss web talks, webinars on YouTube as well. Sometimes we've had to block those if we've gotten a lot of crazy postings, but this topic may not generate that. I would hope more being a more kind of mystical topic.
Rob, you saw the Q&A as well, did you?
Yeah, I'm looking at the Q&A right now, and we've got a lot of them
answered already.
A lot of them are answered actually in the Q&A already.
Daniel, did you have any recommendations on learning and memorizing it? It sounded like you had maybe had worked that out, maybe in one that worked for you.
In English, in one of the verses I didn't talk about, which is translated as "O Spirit, O Light, O Most Manifest One," which in Arabic is "Ya Ruh, Ya Nur, Ya Dhuhur," and the first word doesn't rhyme with the other two. In other words, Ruh doesn't rhyme with Nur or Dhuhur, and so I was thinking about that and trying to make sense of it, and I noticed that if you flip Ruh, it becomes Hur, and Hur does rhyme with Nur and Dhuhur, and of course, Hur are the Huri, which is sometimes translated as virgin when we're talking about virgin in paradise in the Islamic tradition, but in the Baha'i writings has more of a mystical translation of the inner significances of the revelation of God, or the virtues and perfections of God themselves, sometimes the embodiment of the Holy Spirit itself. Something related to, this is a very long way to get back to your question, Boyd, of taking the time just to give each attribute the weight that it should receive, right? Where every perfection of God is very significant and meaningful in of itself, but also as they're given in combinations of three, or this meditative practice of seeing the relationship between those sets of three. I think as far as memorizing an individual verse, that very practice you don't have to do any sort of strange mnemonic devices to memorize the prayer beyond just treating it like a meditative practice in that way.
Thank you.
One person asks, do you agree that the long healing prayer is poetry in poetic form?
Absolutely, yeah. The rhymes, the cadence, sometimes the beautiful imagery, that the combination of attributes. And something I didn't get into was the final paragraphs, which in the concluding paragraphs, it seems to invite the person praying to ascend in nearness, proximal nearness, until one is eventually sitting at the table with God, and then asking God a question before one even is able to articulate one's question. God knows the deepest desire of our hearts and responds with the word yea. Yes, indeed, I grant it to you, your inmost heart. Amazing, beautiful imagery found throughout and then epitomized in those final paragraphs. Thanks for the question.
But it's not a particular form like Qasideh or Masnavi or anything like that. It's not a recognized existing poetic form, is it?
Yeah, I don't know the nuances of all forms of Arabic poetry well enough to be able to have done the comparisons, to be able to speak with confidence to that question. But I thought it was interesting that something like the Masnavi that you mentioned, Rob, Rumi's brilliant masterpiece, which is referred to as the Persian Quran, that in his own, Rumi, speaking about the Masnavi, which has a very consistent rhyming pattern throughout, from what I understand. Franklin Lewis has done extraordinary work in researching that. Rumi said that sometimes he grew frustrated by the sort of the strictures of sticking to this rhyming pattern for whatever tens of thousands of verses that he wrote for the Masnavi. And so I thought it was interesting that Baha'u'llah sometimes has a basic pattern that he sticks to, but sometimes very willingly says, nope, this attribute isn't going to rhyme with the other two. There's going to be some correspondence between them, but it doesn't rhyme. And the same thing with, sometimes there's a one syllable word with the others are two syllables, and that shows up just in the third verse, in which you have ahad, samad, fard, right? And fard sort of rhymes with samad and ahad, but not a full rhyme. And fard is one syllable where the others are two syllables. And so Baha'u'llah just says, this is the basic form, but I'm going to break from it, which in meditating upon it, makes the heart and mind say, okay, what is going on there? He seems to want us to pay attention to what is there. And it's interesting. So in the example I just gave, fard is translated as, I think, peerless one, the one without peer. So this idea of God being incomparable, singular, and that has a single syllable right there that sort of reinforces in a special way that meaning.
Interesting. One person asks also, looking at the prayer from top to bottom or in any particular direction, do you see a discernible progression in any of the attributes or meanings?
Yeah, I looked at if there are, for example, three-letter roots that reappear in the prayer with a discernible pattern, where it's recycled later on, but where, say, the word nasir reappears as the word nasir. And I couldn't find any. I made an elaborate Excel chart to try to see if there's a pattern in this research. I couldn't find any pattern that way. I'd be interested once when it's uploaded and people can comment upon the presentation. If anyone else has found, either in the Arabic or in the English translation, some sort of a vision of God that that evolves in some sort of discernible way, rather than just more of a combinational effect of the more attributes you look at, the more rich is your spectrum vision of the personality of God.
Interesting. Interesting. One person made a very interesting comment here, which I'll go find. He says, daily, a group of friends come together virtually from many different countries to pray this beloved prayer. We have been doing this since the start of the pandemic. Thank you for your insights that you have shared, Daniel. I shall bring these lessons back to the group to help us with our meditative practice. So that's quite nice.
That's really lovely. Yeah, and there's the Navajo were asked about. I know there's, out of Gallup, there was a devotional gathering for the Friends of Dinatan, Navajo land, and my wife and I joined in just for a few minutes with that last night. But Friends in Navajo land and throughout our country, throughout our world, needs all kinds of healing right now, including from the pandemic itself.
Yeah. There's also a note here that on our website for this webinar, you can find more resources at https://wilmetteinstitute.org/Baha'u'llah's -long-healing-prayer. And that should be, it's in the chat, so you can easily go grab it right now if you want to record it, so that after the show is over, you've still got it. I don't see any other questions right offhand. Let me see if there's anything else that's popped in here in either the Q&A one or the chat. I don't see anything right offhand.
Okay, I see Payman Milani. Shout out to my friend Payman. He asks if there's a more official transliteration version. So the first 11 pages is one version of transliteration, which is a little bit more prominent outside of Baha'i circles, that they could look at it where basically the only major difference is sort of an accent mark versus a line above the long vowels. And in Baha'i writings, we use the accent mark more over long vowels than just a line to show long vowels, whereas outside Baha'i circles, you find more of the line. And so whatever is familiar and easiest for you, go for it.
Good. And one person said, oh, here's something that just popped in. Let me see what this is. Lots of comments on social media, but no questions per se. Eileen Vandervelden, thank you for the transliteration gift of seeing this prayer as poetry. Translation, comma, and gift of seeing this prayer as poetry. So that's very nice too.
I hope it'll be very useful to the friends and be able to engage a Tao, which is also so amazing in its translation, but other varieties of significance are found, and we can connect with the Arabic as well.
And like you said, the English, they can't quite preserve the rhyme, but they can preserve, because of the repetitiveness of the Arabic, they can preserve the repetitiveness, at least, of the language in English, which does give you a sense of the flow of the Arabic, which is good, because it gives you a better sense of what the original's like. I don't see it. Go ahead.
Yeah, and the translation, I seem to remember seeing that the translators tried to keep sort of the syllabic, where you have this pretty much the same amount of syllables between the different attributes. But when you add the one, sometimes that helped with that. Sometimes it changes up, but very much has its a beautiful cadence that's preserved in the English translation. The translators were very careful to affect that in the words, their word choice.
Yeah, that's for sure. Well, I don't see anything else right offhand, so perhaps we're at the point now where we can end this particular broadcast today. Thank you again, Daniel. This was really, really fascinating. Fantastic presentation, and I'm sure people will enjoy it for years to come on the YouTube channel. And we're very grateful that you're able to join us. And of course, we want welcome everyone back in about 3 weeks to our next series of 3 web talks in a row. The first one is just the Wilmette Institute talking about its pedagogy, by the way, and the other two look again at African American issues and anti-Black racism as it affects people in our society. So on that note, I want to thank everyone again for joining us and look forward to seeing you all in the future. And again, thank you, Daniel, for this fascinating presentation.
It was my pleasure, and thanks again to you and the Wilmette Institute team for allowing me to share some of this research with everyone today. And aloha to all the friends on today.
Good. Aloha to everyone. Bye-bye.